At the exact millisecond you panic and try to fight to solve a sudden crisis in your life, you have just handed over the master password for it to destroy you. What if I told you that the reason your problems seem to multiply every time you try to fix things is not bad luck, but a surgical mechanism stealing your energy? There is a hidden reason reality seems to fight against you precisely when you desire peace the most. Most people never notice the trap because it disguises itself as responsibility. You think you are being strong by worrying constantly, controlling every detail, replaying every possible outcome in your head. But the more emotionally entangled you become, the more your mind loses clarity. Your body tightens, your reactions accelerate, and slowly, the matrix turns your attention into fuel for the very chaos you are trying to escape. Pay attention to your body for a moment. Notice how quickly tension appears when something unexpected happens. That instant contraction is the doorway where your energy begins leaking away. And once reaction takes control, the problem no longer lives outside you. It starts living inside your nervous system. Do you know that horrible feeling of spending the entire day putting out small fires, solving stressful problems, and arriving at night with a crushing weight inside you, as if your soul were completely exhausted? This unexplained fatigue is not normal everyday stress. It is the physical and undeniable proof that an invisible machine is actively extracting your vital force through every small irritation you feel. And the strangest part is that nothing big may have even happened. Maybe it was just traffic in the morning, a message that arrived with the wrong tone, a bill you were not expecting, someone ignoring you, a delay, a broken appliance, a look of disapproval, tiny moments, tiny cuts. But by the end of the day, your body feels like it carried an entire war on its back. Most people think exhaustion only comes from physical effort, but that is not true. Some of the most destructive fatigue comes from emotional micro-reactions happening silently inside you every hour of the day. Every time your nervous system contracts in frustration, fear, irritation, or anxiety, energy leaves your body. Not metaphorically, literally. You can feel it if you pay attention. Your shoulders tighten, your breathing becomes shallow, your jaw hardens without you noticing, your stomach contracts. Your mind starts spinning faster, replaying conversations that already ended, and even when the external problem disappears, your body continues reacting as if the threat is still alive. This is how the matrix keeps people trapped without them realizing it. Not through giant dramatic events all the time, but through constant low-level emotional extraction. A continuous leak, like a phone battery running dozens of hidden applications in the background. You think you are tired because life is difficult, but much of your exhaustion comes from invisible internal resistance happening every minute. Look at what happens when a person wakes up and immediately checks their phone. In less than 60 seconds, their emotional state is already being pulled in 10 different directions. News, notifications, pressure, comparison, expectations, small emotional hooks everywhere. The body never fully returns to stillness, and when the body never rests internally, the mind starts losing clarity. That is why so many people feel disconnected from themselves now. They are sleeping but not recovering, resting but not recharging, smiling in public while feeling strangely empty inside. Their energy is being consumed in microscopic reactions they no longer even notice. The dangerous thing is that society normalized this condition. People proudly say they are stressed all the time, as if permanent emotional tension were proof of responsibility or maturity. But your system was not designed to remain in constant reaction mode. Human attention is powerful, but it was never meant to be scattered across endless irritation and psychological noise. The matrix survives on unconscious reaction. Think about the days when you felt emotionally peaceful. Problems still existed, but they did not penetrate you in the same way. Your body stayed lighter. Your thoughts moved slower. Solutions appeared more naturally. But on reactive days, even small inconveniences become overwhelming. A single unexpected situation contaminates the next 5 hours of your life. That is not coincidence. Your emotional state changes the way reality organizes itself around you. When your internal system becomes overloaded, your perception narrows. You stop seeing possibilities. You stop hearing intuition. You become easier to manipulate, because survival mode reduces consciousness to immediate emotional impulses. And this is where the trap becomes almost invisible. Most people believe reacting strongly gives them control. They think anger protects them. They think worry prepares them. They think panic helps them solve things faster. But if you observe carefully, emotional reactivity rarely solves the problem itself. It usually amplifies it. A stressful email ruins your concentration for the rest of the afternoon. One argument poisons an entire evening. A financial concern steals energy from moments that had nothing to do with money. The original event was small, but the reaction expanded it inside your nervous system until it occupied your entire reality. The matrix does not need to destroy you in one dramatic moment. It only needs to keep you emotionally activated long enough for you to slowly drain yourself. And after years of this pattern, people begin living with a level of exhaustion they can no longer explain. They call it adulthood, they call it responsibility, they call it normal life. But deep down, something inside them knows this cannot be the natural state of a conscious human being, because your body keeps sending signals. The headaches, the heaviness in the chest, the sudden lack of motivation, the mental fog, the strange sensation of being present physically while absent internally. These are not random failures. They are warning lights. Your system is showing you that something is feeding on your constant emotional output. And once you begin noticing this hidden extraction process, an uncomfortable question starts appearing naturally in your mind. If your reactions are draining your life force every single day, then what exactly is receiving all that energy? Here is the silent flaw that keeps 99% of people trapped in an endless cycle of debt, betrayal, and conflict. The three-dimensional reality around you is sterile. It has no energy of its own to create chaos by itself. The only fuel sustaining the artificial scenarios haunting you is your immediate emotional response. Every time you feel anger, cry, or become distressed in front of an obstacle, you are literally injecting the electricity needed for that problem to continue existing. Most people never stop long enough to notice this mechanism because they are too busy reacting inside it. A problem appears, and instantly the mind begins feeding it with attention, fear, mental repetition, emotional tension, and catastrophic imagination. The situation may have started as something small and temporary, but the moment your nervous system locks onto it emotionally, it begins gaining psychological weight. It starts occupying space inside your body, inside your thoughts, inside your perception of reality. This is the hidden fuel of the matrix, not the event itself, but the emotional current you continuously send into it. Think about how many situations in your life became larger simply because your mind would not release them. An uncomfortable conversation that replayed in your head for 3 days. A rejection that turned into months of self-doubt. A financial issue that consumed your peace before any real consequence even happened. The external event lasted minutes, but the emotional feeding lasted far longer. And the Matrix understands this perfectly. That is why modern life is designed to provoke constant reaction. Every system around you competes for your emotional energy because emotional attention is one of the strongest forces shaping human behavior. Fear spreads faster than peace. Outrage captures attention faster than clarity. Panic creates engagement faster than silence. People wake up and immediately enter a battlefield of emotional stimulation. Notifications, arguments, political division, financial fear, social comparison, pressure to succeed, pressure to respond, pressure to become something else. The nervous system never fully exits survival mode, and a human being trapped in survival mode becomes highly predictable. When you are emotionally reactive, your decisions become automatic. You stop observing carefully. You stop questioning impulses. You become easier to manipulate because your energy is flowing outward in every direction instead of remaining centered inside you. That is why two people can experience the same external situation and produce completely different realities from it. One person loses money and collapses emotionally, feeding fear day and night until more confusion appears. Another person faces the same loss but remains internally stable, observing carefully, adjusting calmly, refusing to mentally worship the problem. One reaction multiplies suffering, the other interrupts the cycle before it grows roots. The difference is not luck, it is energetic participation. Most people do not realize that emotional reaction acts like a contract with the experience itself. The moment you emotionally fuse with chaos, you begin carrying it with you everywhere. You reinforce it through attention, through repetition, through identity. Eventually, some people become so attached to struggle that they no longer know who they are without it. They expect disappointment before life even moves. They anticipate betrayal before trust has a chance to exist. Their nervous system becomes addicted to emotional turbulence because constant reaction has become familiar. And familiarity creates attachment, even when it hurts. This is why some problems seem to follow people for years, not because reality is punishing them, but because the emotional pattern sustaining the experience never truly stopped. The external characters may change, the locations may change, the details may change, but the internal reaction remains identical. The matrix only needs consistency from your emotions to keep reproducing the same cycles in different forms, and this becomes frightening once you start observing it honestly, because you begin noticing how often your energy is unconsciously handed away. A delayed text changes your mood. A stranger's opinion occupies your thoughts for hours. One unexpected expense destroys your inner balance. Small, external triggers gain enormous authority over your internal state. But none of these situations possess independent power on their own. The power enters through your reaction. Imagine a fire that survives only because someone continuously throws wood into it. Most people spend their lives throwing emotional fuel into situations while simultaneously begging for the flames to disappear. They say they want peace, but internally they rehearse fear all day long. They say they want freedom, but emotionally remain chained to every disturbance appearing in front of them. And the cruelest part is that society often rewards this behavior. Reactive people are considered passionate. Anxious people are considered responsible. Chronically stressed people are considered ambitious. Few individuals are taught the strength of emotional neutrality because neutrality cannot be easily manipulated. A calm person interrupts the system. A person who observes without instantly reacting becomes difficult to control because their energy is no longer automatically available to external circumstances. And this is exactly why the next realization becomes so important. From childhood, you were trained to believe that fighting against problems is the same thing as solving them. But there is a dangerous misunderstanding hidden inside that conditioning, one that quietly keeps the matrix alive inside the human nervous system every single day. Since childhood, we were programmed to confront and fight against whatever hurts us. But I need to warn you about something extremely dangerous. In quantum physics, resistance creates density. When you try to fight a problem with rejection, you give physical mass and weight to it. In a moment, I will reveal the only mechanism capable of shutting down this process instantly. But if you continue acting on the autopilot of self-defense, you will keep feeding the monster you are trying to defeat. This is one of the deepest misunderstandings hidden inside the matrix. People believe resistance is strength. They believe emotional retaliation is protection. But observe your own life carefully for a moment. How many times did intense resistance actually free you from suffering? And how many times did it trap you deeper inside the very thing you wanted to escape? The moment you violently reject an experience internally, your attention becomes chained to it. You may leave the room physically, but mentally you stay connected. You replay the argument while driving home. You imagine different responses while trying to sleep. You relive the injustice while showering, eating, working, or speaking to someone else. The body exits the situation, but consciousness remains trapped inside it, and whatever holds your attention holds your energy. That is why emotional resistance is so deceptive. At first, it feels like self-protection. It feels like you are defending yourself against pain, but underneath that reaction, something else is happening silently. Your nervous system is locking onto the threat with total fixation. The matrix does not care whether you love or hate a situation. Both create attachment. In fact, intense hatred often binds people more strongly than affection. You can see this clearly in people who spend years emotionally connected to old betrayals, old enemies, old failures, old versions of themselves. The external event ended long ago, but the internal war never stopped. And because the internal war continues, the body continues producing the chemistry of conflict. Stress hormones remain active, muscles stay tense, breathing stays shallow, the mind becomes hypervigilant, scanning reality for more danger. Eventually, the person begins attracting situations that mirror the emotional frequency they constantly rehearse. Not because the universe is punishing them, but because perception itself changes under emotional resistance. When fear dominates the nervous system, neutral events begin looking threatening. When anger dominates the mind, small frustrations appear enormous. When someone expects conflict everywhere, the brain selectively notices proof confirming that expectation. This is where science and spirituality quietly meet. Your brain constantly filters reality according to emotional focus. Modern neuroscience calls this selective attention. Spiritual traditions described it differently for centuries, but the mechanism is similar. What you emotionally energize becomes more psychologically visible and more dominant inside your experience. And this is exactly why resistance creates density. The more emotionally charged your rejection becomes, the more solid the problem feels in your life. Your attention wraps around it repeatedly until it begins occupying emotional space far beyond its original size. Think about someone stuck in resentment. At first, maybe it was just one painful moment, but after months or years of mental resistance, the resentment becomes part of their identity. It shapes conversations, reactions, decisions, relationships, even body language. A single emotional wound expands until it contaminates entire areas of life. This is how the matrix multiplies suffering without needing constant external force. It simply waits for the mind to continue feeding resistance from within. And the dangerous part is that society encourages this pattern constantly. People are taught to never let things go. They are taught to emotionally fight every discomfort, to react immediately, to defend every opinion, to attack every threat to the ego as if survival depended on it. But endless emotional defense creates exhaustion because the body cannot distinguish between an imagined threat and a real one when emotional intensity remains high. That is why some people feel tired all the time, even during peaceful periods. Their nervous system never exits combat mode. Internally, they are always arguing with something, resisting something, defending against something. The war becomes automatic. And once resistance becomes your default posture, the matrix gains predictable access to your energy. It no longer needs massive crises to destabilize you. Tiny inconveniences become enough. A delayed response, a criticism, a minor uncertainty. The system touches the emotional wound, and the entire internal machinery activates instantly. But there is something even more disturbing hidden here. The harder you emotionally fight against certain experiences, the more life seems to bring them back in different forms. Different people, same emotional pattern, different environment, same inner reaction. It feels almost surgical, as if reality itself keeps pressing on unresolved emotional pressure points. Most people never stop long enough to question why this happens. They assume life is attacking them randomly. But often, the matrix is simply responding to the energy of resistance still active inside the nervous system. And once you begin seeing this mechanism clearly, another pattern suddenly becomes impossible to ignore. The pressure never stays small for long. This is exactly why crises never come alone in your life. If you continue reacting emotionally to everything, the system realizes it has found a food source and starts increasing the pressure on purpose. What begins as a simple object breaking in your house quickly escalates into a crisis at work or an unbearable debt. The simulation calibrates your stress level with surgical precision, forcing larger and larger limits until it guarantees your total collapse. At first, most people think it is just bad luck. One stressful situation appears, then another arrives immediately after. A disagreement at home is followed by tension at work. Financial pressure suddenly combines with emotional exhaustion. Small inconveniences begin stacking together with strange timing, as if reality itself were testing how much weight your nervous system can carry before breaking. And the truth is, something is being tested. Not your intelligence, not your worth, your reactivity. The matrix constantly measures where your attention collapses emotionally. It observes what triggers fear, anger, desperation, shame, panic, or helplessness. And once a reactive pattern becomes predictable, pressure starts appearing with increasing intensity around that exact emotional weakness. You can see this clearly in everyday life. A person already anxious about money suddenly encounters unexpected expenses everywhere. Someone terrified of abandonment keeps entering relationships that activate insecurity. A person emotionally addicted to conflict somehow finds drama in every environment they enter. Different circumstances, same emotional activation. This is not mystical punishment, it is reinforcement. The nervous system begins organizing perception around familiar emotional states, and reality starts mirroring that internal tension back with disturbing precision. The more emotionally reactive someone becomes, the narrower their perception gets. And when perception narrows, life starts feeling like a tunnel with no exits. That is why crises tend to snowball. One emotional reaction lowers your clarity. Reduced clarity creates impulsive decisions. Impulsive decisions generate more instability. More instability creates more emotional reaction. The cycle feeds itself until the person feels trapped inside an avalanche they can no longer control. The matrix does not always attack through catastrophic events. Sometimes it simply removes your ability to stay internally stable, and once stability disappears, even ordinary life begins feeling unbearable. A delayed payment feels like the end of the world. A simple disagreement feels deeply personal. Silence from another person feels threatening. Small uncertainty becomes emotional chaos. The external event may be manageable, but the internal amplification transforms it into psychological overload. This is why two people can walk through the same storm and experience completely different realities. One person becomes consumed by emotional pressure, reacting to every obstacle as proof that life is against them. The other remains internally grounded, adapting without feeding panic into the situation. Externally, both face difficulty. Internally, they occupy entirely different dimensions of experience, and the matrix depends on that emotional amplification to maintain control. Because once you become emotionally overwhelmed, your energy becomes fragmented. You lose access to intuition. Your body enters survival mode. Your thinking becomes reactive instead of conscious. In that condition, people become easier to manipulate by fear, urgency, distraction, and external authority. This is why pressure often arrives in waves. You recover slightly from one stressful event, and another suddenly emerges. Not because the universe hates you, but because reactive energy creates momentum. Emotional instability attracts more situations that resonate with instability itself. Think about moments in your life when everything seemed to break at once. The car problem, the argument, the unexpected expense, the emotional disappointment, the fatigue, the confusion. It felt almost coordinated, as if invisible hands were turning up the intensity little by little. Most people respond by fighting harder. They overthink more, worry more, force more, control more. But this usually accelerates the collapse because the nervous system interprets constant emotional resistance as confirmation that danger is everywhere. And once the body believes danger is constant, peace starts feeling unnatural. This is the hidden tragedy of modern life. Many people have spent so many years reacting to pressure that they no longer remember what inner stillness feels like. Their baseline state becomes tension. Their identity becomes survival. Even during calm moments, the body waits for the next disaster. The matrix trains human beings to expect emotional attack before it arrives, and expectation itself becomes fuel. Because the mind starts rehearsing future suffering in advance. Imaginary conversations, imaginary losses, imaginary failures. The body experiences stress responses to events that have not even happened. Energy gets drained by psychological anticipation long before reality actually moves. This is how pressure multiplies without visible force. And eventually something dangerous happens. People stop questioning the system entirely. They assume suffering is inevitable. They normalize exhaustion. They believe emotional collapse is simply part of adulthood. But there is a flaw hidden inside this machinery that almost nobody notices. The system can only escalate pressure effectively while your reactions remain predictable. It depends completely on emotional participation. The moment a person stops reacting in the expected way, something inside the matrix begins malfunctioning. Because there is one force the system cannot properly calculate, a human being who no longer feeds chaos with resistance. But there is an error in the matrix of this engineering, a truth society hid from you. They taught you that staying silent in the face of an attack or injustice is weakness, that it means being passive. That is the greatest lie ever told. Physics proves that the most dominant force in the universe is not the counterattack but absolute vacuum. The great turning point in your life is that you should not try to block the blows of life. You must become intangible. When the next crisis explodes, do not judge, do not run, and do not feel rage. Simply observe the chaos like a scientist. This changes everything once you truly understand it. Because most human suffering does not come only from events themselves. It comes from the immediate internal collision between the event and the ego's demand for control. The mind instantly labels the experience as wrong, unfair, threatening, unacceptable. And in that exact moment, emotional turbulence begins generating force inside the body. But what happens if the collision never occurs? What happens if the mind observes the situation without instantly creating resistance against it? This is where the matrix starts losing power. Imagine standing in front of an insult, a financial problem, or a sudden disappointment, and instead of emotionally contracting, you remain internally open, not weak, not submissive, just completely present without feeding the situation with panic or hostility. For most people, this feels unnatural at first because they were conditioned to believe every discomfort demands immediate emotional participation. They think reacting proves strength. They think emotional intensity demonstrates importance. But emotional intensity is often exactly what traps them. A calm mind can see options that a reactive mind cannot. A silent nervous system notices details that panic ignores. When the body is not overwhelmed by emotional noise, perception sharpens. Clarity returns. Intuition becomes audible again. This is why emptiness is so powerful. Not emptiness as numbness or emotional suppression. Real emptiness is spacious awareness without compulsive reaction. It is the ability to let an experience exist for a moment without instantly turning it into psychological warfare. Very few people practice this. The average person experiences a stressful situation and immediately becomes mentally entangled inside it. Their mind races ahead into future disaster. Their emotions amplify the scenario. Their identity fuses with the problem. Within minutes, the external event has occupied their entire internal world. But the person who becomes internally empty interrupts this process before it spreads. They feel the tension, but they do not become the tension. That distinction matters more than people realize. Because the matrix feeds on identification, it needs you to merge emotionally with fear, anger, urgency, or helplessness. Once that emotional fusion happens, your energy becomes accessible to the system automatically. But emptiness creates non-cooperation. When you observe chaos without psychological attachment, the situation loses part of its ability to control your internal state. The event may still exist externally, but it stops multiplying inside your nervous system. This is why some people can walk through enormous crises while remaining strangely centered. Others assume they are emotionally cold or detached, but often they simply learned something rare. Not every storm deserves internal residence. And this has nothing to do with pretending problems are not real. You still take action. You still make decisions. You still protect yourself when necessary. But internally, you stop feeding emotional poison into the situation. You stop turning temporary circumstances into permanent psychological prisons. There is a powerful difference between conscious action and emotional reaction. Reaction is automatic. Action is intentional. Reaction burns energy blindly. Action directs energy precisely. The matrix survives by keeping humanity trapped in reaction because reactive people are easier to destabilize. They can be manipulated through fear, distracted through outrage, controlled through emotional urgency. But emptiness disrupts the signal. When someone refuses to emotionally collapse on command, the system loses its predictive rhythm. Fear no longer guarantees obedience. Pressure no longer guarantees panic. Conflict no longer guarantees emotional feeding. This is why silence feels so uncomfortable to many people. Not external silence, internal silence. The moment external stimulation disappears, unresolved emotional noise rises to the surface. People suddenly feel restless, anxious, exposed. They reach for distractions immediately because stillness reveals how dependent the nervous system became on constant emotional movement. But inside that silence, something extraordinary begins happening. You start noticing how many emotional reactions were never truly yours. Patterns inherited from family, fear absorbed from society, defensiveness programmed through years of stress, automatic responses repeating themselves mechanically like invisible code inside the body. And once you observe the code clearly, you stop confusing it with your identity. That is the beginning of real freedom. Not controlling the world outside you, but refusing to become internally possessed by every movement occurring around you. The matrix cannot fully dominate a person who knows how to remain emotionally unhooked in the middle of uncertainty. But this is also the moment when the system becomes most aggressive, because the instant you stop supplying emotional energy in the usual way, reality often responds with one final escalation designed to pull you back into reaction again. But pay very close attention to what will happen during the first days you apply this posture. The moment you cut off the emotional supply, the simulation will panic from starvation. It will force even more absurd events in front of you, one final violent test to pull any spark of desperation out of you. This is the critical moment. If you weaken and go back to reacting, the entire cycle of suffering starts again from zero. But if you apply the secret of silent absorption, you will begin witnessing something most people never notice. The pressure often increases right before it loses power. This is a phenomenon that appears everywhere in life, even outside spirituality. In psychology, behaviors frequently intensify before disappearing. A child cries louder right before giving up. An addiction screams for attention before weakening. Old emotional patterns become more aggressive the moment you stop feeding them automatically. The matrix behaves in a similar way. When your nervous system suddenly refuses to react as expected, reality can feel strangely unstable for a while. Unexpected delays appear. People become more confrontational. Emotional triggers emerge with suspicious precision. It can feel as if life itself is trying to provoke you back into the old cycle. And this is where most people fail, not because they are weak, but because they misunderstand what is happening. They assume the increased pressure means their new posture is not working. They think calmness failed because external chaos temporarily became louder. But often that escalation is evidence that the old emotional mechanism is losing access to your energy source. Imagine unplugging a machine that has been running for years. The system does not instantly become silent. Sometimes it shakes violently before shutting down. Momentum still exists for a while. Residual patterns continue moving through the nervous system. Emotional habits built over decades do not disappear in a single peaceful afternoon. That is why the first phase feels so uncomfortable. You may sit in silence while your mind desperately searches for something to fear. Your body may crave emotional drama because it became chemically familiar with stress hormones. Some people even unconsciously create new problems during this period because emotional chaos feels safer than inner stillness. This is how deeply the matrix conditions human behavior. People become addicted to emotional reaction without realizing it, not because suffering feels good, but because familiarity creates psychological gravity. The nervous system prefers predictable pain over unfamiliar peace, and this is why silent observation becomes so powerful during moments of escalation. When the next trigger appears, the old version of you wants immediate emotional movement. Defend yourself, explain yourself, panic, chase, control, overthink. But instead, you remain still long enough to watch the reaction arise without obeying it instantly. That pause changes everything. Because for the first time you are separating awareness from automatic conditioning. You begin seeing that emotions are waves moving through the body, not commands that must control your behavior. Fear may appear, but you do not become fear. Anger may rise, but you do not hand your entire consciousness over to it. The emotional storm moves, but something deeper inside you remains untouched. The matrix cannot fully control a person who learns this distinction. That is why external pressure often becomes strangely theatrical during this phase. Situations may appear almost exaggerated, as if reality is searching desperately for the exact emotional button that still works on you. A random message suddenly ruins someone's mood. An old conflict resurfaces out of nowhere. Technology fails at the worst possible moment. Financial tension appears unexpectedly. The timing can feel almost artificial. But if you observe carefully, the real battle is no longer external. The true battle is whether you interpret the event unconsciously or consciously. One path leads back into emotional feeding. The other interrupts the cycle completely. And this interruption does not require perfection. You do not need to become emotionally numb or spiritually superhuman. The shift happens the moment you stop instantly surrendering your nervous system to every external disturbance. Even a few seconds of conscious non-reaction begin weakening the old structure. Because the matrix depends on reflexive emotional participation, it needs speed, it needs unconsciousness, it needs you reacting before awareness has time to enter the room. But awareness slows the mechanism down. You start noticing how much suffering begins in anticipation rather than reality itself. You observe how quickly the mind creates catastrophic narratives around incomplete information. You see how emotional panic tries to convince you that immediate reaction equals survival. And once you see the mechanism clearly, something surprising happens. The emotional charge begins losing density faster than before. Situations that once consumed entire weeks of your life start dissolving in hours. Certain conflicts stop escalating entirely because your energy no longer reinforces them. Some people even disappear from your experience once they can no longer access predictable emotional reactions from you. This is when the matrix starts losing synchronization with your nervous system. But there is still one final skill that determines whether this transformation becomes stable or temporary. Because it is not enough to merely suppress reactions outwardly while chaos continues exploding internally. The energy itself must be absorbed differently. Instead of projecting your power outward through complaints, you will act like a black hole. When the offense, the unexpected bill, or the artificial tragedy tries to provoke you, swallow that raw energy into your own center. Feel the tension in the air, but refuse to label it as good or bad. By refusing to emit the frequency of fear, canceling your role as a reactive observer, the quantum wave of that problem loses its magnetism, becoming incapable of anchoring itself in your physical plane. This does not mean becoming cold, emotionless, or disconnected from life. It means learning how to stop leaking your energy into every disturbance that crosses your path. Most people were never taught this. The moment tension appears, they instantly project themselves outward. They complain, argue, defend, panic, explain, rehearse scenarios, seek validation, or emotionally explode. All of these reactions push enormous amounts of energy away from their own center, and the matrix thrives on that externalization. Because when your energy is constantly projected outward, your inner stability becomes dependent on circumstances you cannot fully control. Your peace starts depending on how people behave, how money flows, how fast answers arrive, how perfectly life obeys your expectations. That is a fragile way to exist. The person who absorbs energy differently begins operating from another level entirely. When pressure appears, they do not immediately release emotional electricity into the environment. They pause, they breathe, they allow the sensation to exist inside the body without turning it into psychological warfare. At first, this feels intensely uncomfortable. The nervous system is used to immediate discharge. It wants relief through reaction. The mind wants to label the situation instantly: good, bad, dangerous, unfair, urgent. But the moment you stop labeling experience automatically, something extraordinary begins happening inside your awareness. The emotional charge starts losing structure. Think about how fire behaves when oxygen disappears. It cannot sustain the same intensity. In the same way, emotional chaos weakens when the mind stops continuously feeding it with interpretation and resistance. This is why inner absorption is so powerful. You are no longer fighting the energy. You are containing it consciously until it transforms naturally, instead of spreading through your thoughts, relationships, and decisions like poison. most suffering escalates because people cannot hold emotional tension without immediately reacting to it. They feel discomfort and instantly try to escape it through action, argument, distraction, or control. But the reactive discharge itself often creates the very consequences they fear. One impulsive message destroys a relationship. One panic-driven decision creates financial damage. One emotional outburst generates conflict that lasts for years. The original tension may have been temporary, but unconscious reaction gave it physical consequences. The matrix depends on this chain reaction. It needs emotional energy to move outward rapidly before consciousness can stabilize it internally. But when someone learns to absorb pressure without instantly transmitting fear back into reality, the entire mechanism begins weakening. This is why certain people carry an unusual presence around them, not because life never tests them, but because they stopped multiplying chaos through unconscious reaction. They can sit inside uncertainty without collapsing. They can face tension without immediately spreading tension. Their nervous system becomes less available to external manipulation. And this changes how reality responds to them, because most people communicate emotionally with life before they communicate verbally. The body emits signals constantly: fear, desperation, urgency, defensiveness. The nervous system broadcasts internal states into behavior, tone, posture, timing, and decision-making. When fear dominates someone internally, their actions often become scattered and reactive. But when a person remains centered during pressure, their perception sharpens. They notice opportunities hidden behind emotional noise. Solutions appear that panic would have overlooked completely. This is why silent absorption is not passivity. It is disciplined, energetic containment. You stop throwing your consciousness into every external disturbance. You stop allowing temporary situations to dictate your internal atmosphere. Instead of emotionally chasing reality, you let reality reveal itself before deciding how to move. The matrix struggles to maintain control over people who operate this way because emotional predictability disappears. A manipulative person expects emotional reactions and suddenly receives calm observation instead. A stressful event expects panic and encounters patience. An external disruption searches for internal collapse but finds stillness instead. And when emotional feeding stops, many situations begin dissolving on their own, not magically, mechanically. Some conflicts only survive because both sides continuously energize them. Some fears only grow because the mind rehearses them repeatedly. Some toxic dynamics depend entirely on predictable emotional participation to maintain momentum. Once your reactions become unavailable, the structure loses reinforcement. This is why certain problems strangely vanish once you stop obsessing over them. The energy maintaining them weakens. The emotional glue dissolves. What once felt heavy suddenly feels distant, almost unreal. But there is an important difference between conscious absorption and emotional suppression. Suppression hides emotion while tension silently accumulates underneath. Real absorption allows the sensation to move through the body without resistance or projection. You acknowledge the energy fully, but you refuse to become possessed by it. And that distinction determines everything. Because eventually, if you continue refusing to feed external chaos with emotional energy, reality itself begins reorganizing around your new frequency. The old patterns can no longer survive the absence of reaction that once kept them alive. It is in this instant of absolute non-reaction that chaos dies suffocated. Without your emotional energy to render the image of the obstacle, problems begin to dry up. Massive financial crises find unusual solutions, toxic people disappear from your timeline, and scenarios that once seemed impossible lose their validity. They were not defeated by your physical strength. They simply starved to death in front of you because you finally stopped being their main source of food. And when this begins happening, the experience feels almost unreal at first. Not because your life suddenly becomes perfect, but because you start noticing how many situations were surviving only through constant emotional reinforcement. The moment your inner resistance weakens, reality itself begins behaving differently around you. Conflicts stop escalating with the same intensity. Certain people lose interest in provoking you. Problems that once consumed weeks of emotional energy resolve themselves through simple conversations, unexpected timing, or opportunities you could not previously see. The matrix begins collapsing in the exact places where your unconscious reactions once kept it stable. This is why emotional non-reaction is not weakness. It is energetic refusal. You are no longer agreeing to participate in patterns that survive through fear, urgency, anger, and psychological exhaustion. And once that agreement disappears internally, many false structures lose the ability to maintain themselves around you. Most people underestimate how much emotional attention sustains their suffering. They think they are merely responding to life, when in reality they are continuously reinforcing emotional loops through repetition. The mind returns to the same fear every day, the same resentment, the same anticipation of disaster, the same emotional identity. Eventually, the body begins treating those states as familiar reality, but familiarity is not truth. This is one of the deepest illusions inside the matrix. Repeated emotional states begin feeling permanent simply because they have been rehearsed for so long. A person lives in stress for years and starts believing tension is their personality. Another experiences repeated disappointment and begins expecting betrayal from everyone. The emotional pattern becomes normalized until they stop questioning it entirely. But when conscious non-reaction enters the system, the emotional rehearsal finally gets interrupted. And interruption changes momentum. Think about a spinning wheel. If force keeps pushing it, it continues rotating. But when the pushing stops, the movement gradually weakens on its own. In the same way, many painful cycles in life continue spinning because emotional energy keeps feeding them daily. The moment the feeding stops, the old momentum begins collapsing naturally. This is why some people experience dramatic shifts after learning emotional neutrality. Relationships that felt suffocating suddenly fade away. Long periods of confusion clear unexpectedly. Opportunities appear where obstacles once dominated perception. Even the body sometimes feels lighter because the nervous system is no longer carrying constant internal warfare. And the most surprising part is this: you often do not need to defeat reality as aggressively as you were taught. The Matrix trained people to believe every problem requires emotional combat. Fight harder, worry more, control more, defend more. But many situations lose power the moment you stop emotionally wrestling with them. Not every shadow needs to be attacked. Some disappear the moment light enters the room. That light is awareness without emotional addiction. Once you stop compulsively reacting, you begin seeing how much of life was distorted by internal noise. Fear exaggerated possibilities. Anger narrowed perception. Anxiety projected catastrophe into neutral situations. Emotional turbulence acted like a filter over reality itself. And when the filter weakens, clarity returns quietly. You stop forcing outcomes with desperation. You stop trying to mentally control every unknown. You stop chasing certainty as if survival depended on predicting every possible future. Instead, your energy starts returning to the present moment where actual life is happening. This creates a level of psychological freedom most people rarely experience, because for the first time, external circumstances no longer completely dictate your inner state. Problems may still arise, but they stop colonizing your consciousness. Challenges still exist, but they no longer define your identity. Fear still visits occasionally, but it no longer controls the architecture of your mind. The matrix loses access to automatic emotional control, and once that happens consistently, something almost shocking begins unfolding. Reality becomes less hostile. Not because the world changed overnight, but because your participation in suffering changed fundamentally. You stopped amplifying chaos internally. You stopped emotionally animating obstacles with constant attention. You stopped handing your nervous system over to every disturbance asking for energy. That withdrawal alone transforms more than people realize, because many systems around you were unconsciously calibrated to your old reactions. Toxic dynamics depended on predictable emotional access. Fear-based thinking depended on continuous reinforcement. Certain cycles survived only because your attention kept resurrecting them every day. But now the feeding has stopped, and without emotional fuel, false structures begin collapsing under their own weight. This is the moment where many people finally understand something they were never taught growing up. Inner silence is not emptiness, It is power waiting without fear. You were never born to be the battery that keeps the world's drama and suffering running. Starting today, engrave this absolute law into your subconscious. The matrix collapses. When you stop reacting, pull your energy back into your chest, abandon the exhausting need to fight the illusions outside of you, and dive into your unshakable silence. The entire universe will have no choice but to completely reorganize itself to serve the mind that refuses to be disturbed. The moment you stop feeding chaos with fear, something inside you wakes up again. Your body becomes lighter, your thoughts become clearer, and life stops feeling like a constant war against yourself. This is not about escaping reality. It is about finally seeing how much power you were unconsciously giving away every single day. The matrix only survives through unconscious reaction. And now you can see it. If you made it all the way here, write this phrase in the comments. My silence is stronger than chaos. I want to know who is truly ready to reclaim their energy. And if this message connected with you deeply, watch one of the videos appearing on your screen right now. There is much more waiting for you on this path. If you also want to support the channel and access exclusive content coming soon, become a member and walk this journey with us.